everyone. Welcome again to another new episode of ESL Talk.
Yeah, last week we talked all about teaching lower level students, and we really learned a lot from our special guest, Nicole. And this week we'll be rolling on in season 4 with an episode all about the topic of corpus linguistics.
And of course, if you want to stay in the know and get early access to our new episodes, extra content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/ESL Talk.
Thank you, Faye. So this week we are covering the curious topic of corpus and corpus linguistics. What is it? How can we use it? And how can it help our students in our classes?
And our special guest, Ben, is joining us to share his knowledge and expertise on this topic. He will probably help us better understand corpus and how we can use it so effectively. So why don't we start by sharing our knowledge and our expertise or experience on this topic? So,
yeah, absolutely.
Daniel, what exactly is your understanding of corpus linguistics?
Well, honestly, if I'm being 100% transparent, this is not something that I'm 100% comfortable with as a teacher. Now, it's something that we're aware of. It's something that we use without really
or we see
realizing.
Written, right?
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of corpus linguistics itself, it's more about a methodology, a way of looking at words that are used, texts that are used, and you can find a really wide range of different Corpora, which is the plural form, which help us kind of understand which words to use, how often words are used, where they're used, when they're used. So it kind of just gives us a really nice overview of words and language, and it can really help us and our students to use the right words in the right times, in the right context. So that's basically how corpus linguistics makes sense to me. But obviously there's a lot more deeper, more technical aspects, which I guess Ben will go into today.
Right. Well, I think the key thing here is that it's data, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that's the thing. And how we use it, I guess it really depends on our knowledge of it and your objectives. But yeah, it's just data. And I like what you said. It's like how we use it, when we use it, what words to use, but informed by the way people actually use it.
Exactly. It's not just the what, it's more about the why and the how, and kind of those are the deeper questions. It's a little bit more critical than just a dictionary or a thesaurus, which just gives us the words and their definition.
And it definitely prescribes more, right? When it's a dictionary.
Exactly.
It tells you this is the word, use it. But corpus will tell you, do we really use it?
Exactly.
These are the words we actually use, right?
So Faye, how exactly do we use it? Maybe in a classroom setting, or if I'm a student, how would you use this with me?
So I find that knowing that there is this study of the corpus we use and all the words we use really helps us as teachers, first of all, be informed and be more secure and confident of what we're teaching our students. Often we see so many resources and books and things that we're told to teach. And you might think, but I've never said this before. Or, yeah, my grandma maybe says this. Those things like that we're teaching it, but at the same time you're feeling like, meh. And then when students ask you, but I've never heard anyone say this. You're like, yeah, actually nobody does. And I feel that when we're planning or prepping for a lesson, if we use the knowledge of corpus linguistics and if we look at all these tools that show the frequency of words and all that, it can back up that intuition we have. And it can make us more confident to say, yeah, it exists. It used to be used. Maybe it's no longer used and stuff like that. So I find that that's the most valuable way to use it as teachers, is just as a way to back up our intuition and help us be more critical of the materials we sometimes teach with. Can you think of a way that this can be a useful tool?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the classroom?
Yeah, this actually comes up more often than you think. And as teachers, you might come across a situation where a student says, well, why do we say this? Or why do people in the US say this, but people in the UK say this? So it's kind of about variation as well, and different varieties of spoken and written English as well. So again, you might get those questions of, well, why is it? And you might say, well, just because it is. Well, there's obviously a reason. It might be cultural, it might be contextual, it might be historical. And we need to maybe use corpus to better understand that, because nowadays, especially teaching online or even in the classroom, a lot of what we teach should be based on real, practical, authentic communication. And by utilizing Corpora and the different types of corpus linguistics, we can really drill down and clearly show a student or show a group of students, okay, these are more natural, better choices, more suitable and applicable for you as a student to use.
Right. In this
Um,
situation, right? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we talked about idioms, with Ben, and with those idioms, some of them, yeah, I know what they are, you know what they are, but are you really going to use it? Or if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
use it, when are you going to have that opportunity? So it's
Mm-hmm.
about, again, finding the best options to suit your situation and to suit the context that you might be involved in. So I would say
Great.
that's the best way to really utilize this as a tool. And there's a lot of really valuable resources and things you can utilize. It's not super academic. There are obviously a lot more general tools you can use to exploit this, and it's not something to be intimidated about. It can actually really help us understand
Mm-hmm.
our learners and understand how we teach as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I would say we should use this. But in terms of compiling and gathering corpus text, how can we do that, Faye?
Well, I think that most of that work is already kind of done for us, and
Mm.
I don't think we should worry so much about creating our own corpus of a language or something. But the great thing about it is that it's all out there. So, like you mentioned, maybe this is not so academic, or this is more for writing, and you can actually search for specific sets of corpus language, where you go like, okay, this is the corpus of academic English,
Hmm.
or American academic English. It can be
Right.
quite specific, and you can find, like, you see those lists of the AWL, right? The most common academic words, American academic words,
Hmm.
that students should know if they want to do an IELTS academic exam and stuff like that, or if they want to go to university in North America. That's all corpus based. So you can definitely go to the right sources of information once you know a little bit more about that. And Ben can give us give us more pointers on that. Like if a student is training for the Cambridge exam, actually, Cambridge has their own corpus for the exam that they
Right.
use to inform their books. That's why sometimes when you're teaching for an exam like that, you're like, well, I don't really say it, but I guess I have to teach this because
Hmm.
it will be on the exam. So that's where that knowledge is so important for us, and for us to know, like you said, which situation and which context the word is used in, and how that can help our students, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when it comes to some, like some specific compilations, if you are studying or you're teaching IELTS, then of course there is a corpus for that exists.
Yeah.
If it's more academic based English, there's obviously an academic corpus of academic language. If it's more conversation or new words or new vocabulary that's
Yeah.
coming out that's being used, again, you can find all those lists. And if you just listen on a little bit later, Ben's going to give you some actual real examples of websites and resources that you can use to utilize this a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, we're not experts, and we're happy to say that.
Yeah.
This is why we have
We're
the
also
expert.
learning.
Yeah, this is why we have the expert joining us today. And again, we felt it was really important to cover this topic because, again, this is something that we have awareness of, but maybe we don't really fully understand as teachers. And
Yeah.
by understanding this, we can really start to get a better understanding of, how we can provide better material, how we can provide better
Mm-hmm.
options for students, and how we can improve communication skills between us and our students, and how they can take them from the classroom into the real world as well.
Well, then let's just move on to our next section and have a chat with Ben about all this.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us today on ESL Talk.
We're so happy to have you here with us and to pick your brains about this topic that I know you're really passionate about. To start off, could you tell us a little bit about your teaching and academic journey and how you ended up focusing a lot of your research on corpus linguistics?
Sure. So I guess I've been in the TESOL game for about 20 years at this point. And like a lot of people, I just started as a teacher, and I was in Thailand. And then after that, Costa Rica for a number of years, Vancouver, where you were, Faye. And these days I'm here in Pittsburgh. And I guess just over time, I started to get experience in all the different parts of the TESOL world. So in teacher training and doing publishing work and in academic management, all that. And I was just super interested in why people do the things they do. So why learners do the things they do, why teachers do the things they do, and basically, well, what are some of the best practices, or how can I make the most of my time as a teacher and as a teacher trainer? So I just started to get more and more interested in the academic side, which sort of led to doing a couple of masters and a PhD, and that's where I am now, sort of straddling the classroom and also the research environment.
Wow, amazing. Sounds like a really interesting journey, and obviously getting into this field of corpus linguistics, which some of our listeners might not be too familiar with. So we already spent a little bit of time defining what a corpus is, but could you clarify for our listeners how a corpus is different from a dictionary that teachers might already use?
Sure. So corpus linguistics is basically, well, corpus comes from the word body. So a corpus is just a body of text. So it could be anything from a handful of student essays on your desk. But then really when people talk about corpora, usually what they mean is really big bodies of text. So this can be written or spoken text, millions and now billions of words. So in order to do that, they tend to be stored on computers, so they're machine readable. And they're authentic text. So this is the important part, is that it's natural language and use that's been collected. And they have to be representative. And so what it means by that is it's not just random bits of text from different places, but when you build up this big body of texts, you think about it in advance. So, I want this percentage of it to be from, for example, speech or writing, or I want some of them to be from newspapers and some of the text to be from soap operas, and I want some of the text to be from medical sciences, so that whatever your body of text is trying to represent, it actually represents.
Right. And you also, like in your research, I know you often refer to COCA as your reference for that, right? Can you tell our listeners what that is, what the acronym stands for maybe, and why it's useful in the fields of linguistics and ESL?
Right. So there's lots and lots of corpora out there in the world, and all different types. There's some really specific ones. So you can find like a corpus of just Canadian English, or a corpus of aviation English, or there's learner corpora of texts from learners, but there's also some really big corpora, which are what are called reference corpora or general corpora, and these are intended to be sort of a baseline to represent really broad varieties of English, like all of North American English. And so one that you mentioned that I often use is called COCA. It's the Corpus of Contemporary American English, and at this point it's about 1 billion words, so they're always adding to it. So that's one nice thing, is that it's always being updated. And it's intended to represent, like I said, American English, but really all of North American English. And so it's really useful as a tool for looking at and saying, well, how is language actually being used in the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because it reminds me, I still remember this conversation we had when we worked together for a while. And I always had students frustrated with like look like and look as if, because you'd get all these prescriptive grammar books that would say, if it's a subject and a verb, you have to say as if. But in practice, we always say look like. And we had this conversation about how valuable, let's say, corpus can be for that, or a corpora can be for that, because people don't say like look as if anymore as much, right? And I remember you showed me how we could even check how often it's used, how it used to be used. And I found that super enlightening and useful, because it made me as a teacher reevaluate the materials I was using, because sometimes we get stuck just trying to prescribe grammar, prescribe language that we see in books, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think that just goes to show it doesn't matter if you're an expert speaker or not. Your intuitions are great and they're a great tool, but our intuitions are always going to be limited by our own biases. So we tend to, we don't know all the things we know or we don't know. We tend to be influenced by our own lives and our own context, and recency, and concreteness. So it's really hard to always completely trust your intuitions about things like frequency, about lexis. So that's where it's nice to look at the data and to check your intuitions.
Exactly.
The beauty of English, the beauty of the English language. It's can be great, but sometimes, we have those situations where students ask us, well, why do we say this, or why don't we say that? And sometimes we don't know the answers, and leads to my favorite expression in learning and teaching, which is, you don't know what you don't know. So it can relate to us. So talking about this, Ben, how can teachers use this knowledge to help them in their day-to-day prep or teaching work? Are there any kind of practical applications for this that we can use?
Yeah, definitely. And I think corpus information comes in at a lot of different levels. So at sort of a high level, it can inform like curricula or syllabus design. Below that, it can also inform like material design. So as you know, there's hundreds of thousands of different words in English and a really limited amount of class time. So there's always this like cost benefit analysis going on. Whenever you decide to teach something, whether you know it or not, you're deciding to teach one thing and not to teach other things. So I think it's really important to make the most use of that time. And to do that, you have to really sort of carefully decide what, in this case, vocabulary or grammar structures you're going to teach. And so corpus data can inform those decisions. So I know a lot of material designers, we use it, for example, when we're writing texts to make sure that all the vocabulary is at the level that we're intending it to be at. So you can say, oh, all this vocab is at CFR level B1, or it's in the 2,000 most frequent word families or lemmas, or whatever way you use to judge these kinds of things. And then also planning lessons. So a level below that, I find it really useful when I'm deciding what to teach. Like I said, to check my intuitions about things. For example, well, what are the most natural collocations? I have this vocabulary word, maybe it's already in the book or maybe something I've selected. Well, which collocations should I teach with that word that would be the most useful and help the learners to sound the most natural and appropriate in a range of contexts? So I can just quickly check, well, what are some of the collocations that go with this word?
Makes sense. So when we think about some tools, are there maybe some websites or softwares or even text-based, corpus-based tools that teachers can use to help them apply these strategies?
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about corpus linguistics is that there's tons of tools and most of them are freely available. So there's something for everyone. So it depends on your level of interest and sort of tech savviness, but there's lots of free online interfaces. So going back to COCA, one of the ones that I use a lot, englishcorpora.org. I think there's a hyphen in there. Let me quickly check. Yeah, english-corpora.org, compiled at Brigham Young University in Utah, but they host COCA, but also many other corpora. So you can look at, there's the Strathi corpus of like Canadian English. There's a corpora of, for example, soap operas. There's a corpus of Wikipedia. So there's all types of different corpora, but the big one is COCA. There you can just type in words or strings of words, and it will tell you, well, the frequency. You can ask for the collocations, and it will tell you, oh, here are all the most common collocations with these words.
Amazing.
And you can set all kinds of parameters, like, oh, I only want all the adjective collocations with this noun, or I only want all the adverbs that come before this verb, for example. And you can compare as well. So you can compare across like British English and American English. So you can check the British National Corpus and see how it's used there compared to in the American corpus. And sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. So a useful website. But there's lots of others too. Ones like justtheword.com is a simpler one that learners can use as well. And sometimes if you just want a really like quick and dirty corpus search, you can use netspeak.org. It doesn't really use a corpus, it uses the entire web. So it just checks in the entire web, and there's very few options, but it's a nice way to very quickly check. And maybe one other is the Google Ngrams website. So if you just search for Google Ngrams, and what that does is it checks all the billions of books that Google has scanned. So if you've ever searched for a book, and sometimes you can like see a PDF of it in Google and it gives you like a sample of a few pages, that's part of their corpus. And basically they tried to scan every book that's ever been written anywhere ever, is my understanding. And so last time I checked, they'd scanned like 5 billion books or something like that. So it's this huge corpus of data, and that one will tell you over time. So it gives you a really nice little graph showing from the 1800s to now how words or phrases have been used, and you can compare them. And so I like that one too.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's actually like, I remember when you showed me these tools as well. It's just, I found it a lot of fun. So I highly encourage our listeners to try all these tools out as well, just to see which one they like most and what works best for them. A suggestion I have that was interesting is searching for if I was and if I were. We did that on Ngram once. And just, you can clearly see how if I were and if I was used to be more common, and now if I were is a lot more common.
But that one's a really interesting one because it gets back to what you mentioned about prescriptive versus descriptive accounts of language. Because prescriptively, a lot of people will say, oh, you need to use the subjunctive. It has to be if I wish I were every time. But then if you look at the usage, that they're pretty much even. They're sort of 50-50. So to tell students never to say, I wish I was, I think you're doing a disservice because
Yeah.
it is used naturally in language, and that's from the book corpus. So it's not just in spoken English either. This is in written form.
More literary, yeah. And do you notice a difference between more current and older course books in terms of the corpora included in the lessons? Can you like clearly spot that and be like, oh yeah, this is old corpus?
Sometimes I would say that even now, I think most course books like to say they're sort of corpus informed. So when you read the descriptions, they say that. There's very few that say they're corpus based. So a little bit of a stronger usage. And I think that's fine, but some course books really take corpus data really seriously in terms of deciding what to teach. And I think a lot of course books do it in terms of the vocabulary, but less so in terms of the grammar.
Right.
But like a series like Touchstone was written by Michael McCarthy, who's sort of a big name in applied linguistics and Lexis and corpus linguistics. So he obviously took this idea of using corpus data really seriously. And there is research that shows that that series of course books is more informed by corpus findings than others. But you see things like with grammar structures, like, when we teach future forms, we always teach, that you should use the present continuous to talk about these, fixed plans. But then when you look at corpus data, like the amount of time that we actually use the present continuous to talk about the future is such a small percentage of the time compared to the will. Yeah, I mean,
it's not very realistic.
We use will all the time. It's such a huge percentage. And the other one is other modals, and we don't cover that as much in course books, like using may or can or might or could to talk about future actions is pretty common. So I think, yes, it does impact course books, but probably more for vocabulary than grammar at this point.
And just tagging on to that, can you think of some examples of language? We already mentioned a couple, but some examples of language that has become dated as a result of our changing English corpus?
I mean, I think we have pretty good intuitions about when we see activities about old technology or with idioms a lot. That they've, when you spot someone teaching, it's raining cats and dogs. You see this like in idiom books or idiom courses all the time, and like the frequency of full idioms is so low. Whereas other things like semi-fixed expressions or collocations or these are far higher, and I think have more like teaching worth than teaching these really low frequency idioms, which are also pretty dated in a lot of cases. So I'm not a huge proponent of spending a lot of time teaching full idioms. One of my pet peeves.
I know. And I remember we used to have a class at a school we worked together that was just for idioms. And I had to teach it for a while. I'm like, I just want to create my own materials, but I don't have enough time for that. I guess we're taking this unit from this book, and you just felt like a fraud teaching it.
Are you throwing them under the bus, Faye?
A little bit. But it's just, I mean, there are idioms that are used, and I think that's part of our job too. Like you work with what you have, right? And then just pointing it out to students, I think, is important. And that's where all this research comes into play. And you can say like, yeah, you have all these idioms. I might hear people say these, but this is definitely one that I would use. And I think that's a way to work around that too, right? Using the material and just making students aware of it. That yes, it exists. This is what it means, but you don't
just
really
on a
need to say it all the time.
As opposed to the actual dating or dated expressions or corpus that we use, could we say that perhaps it varies on a cultural basis? So, for example, I've worked abroad and I've seen books and materials that are quote unquote new, but then the language that is used or the vocabulary that we have to teach is very dated. So is that an element of it as well, would you say, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, different publishers invest different amounts of resources into material creation. And sometimes it's just up to, a teacher has to write a course book quickly and on a quick deadline and on a small budget, and you don't have time to have lots of people look at it or to spend a lot of time researching what you're going to be including. Some of the big publishers tend to have a few more resources and sets of eyes and rounds of work on it. So there are practicalities involved for sure. And I'm also guilty of that. I've written materials with, I still check like the frequencies of vocabulary, but I'm not nitpicking every single thing that I'm including in the material. I don't have the time and not getting paid enough to do that. So
that's another story, I think. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Great.
for sure.
I think like you said, it's just about making sure that what we're teaching is relevant, it's accessible, that it can be used, in a practical sense and in a realistic sense as well. And I think that's something that we all try to teach, when we are delivering to our students. But in terms of some resources, then what are some resources that you recommend for our listeners if they want to kind of learn more or dive a little deeper into this topic?
Right. So in addition to like the online tools that you can use, there's a huge body of work, and not just heavy academic papers, but there's a lot of there's a lot of books that are intended for a wider audience. So let's see, a couple of good ones. It's a little bit older now, but from 2010, there was one by Randy Repin called Using Corpora in the Language Classroom. So that has a lot of good practical ideas. More recently, there's one called, Beyond the Concordance Line, or Beyond Concordance Lines. So that's one that came out last year. And so this is one of these handbooks, which I really like. So it's a handbook with each chapter written by somebody different. And so there's lots of ideas for using corpus data in the classroom as teacher trainers. I should mention there is a big field of research called data-driven learning, DDL, which is getting students to use corpus tools and corpus data themselves in the classroom. To be honest, I found in my own experience that I prefer to use corpus data and tools at the planning stage, so helping teachers to plan lessons, and less so with learners actually using these tools themselves in the classroom. But that might just be the context in which I've taught, and perhaps at higher levels and in academic situations, there's sort of more value in having students do it themselves. But I'm a big proponent of sort of indirect corpus use, which is having the teachers and the curriculum designers use these tools, even if it's hidden from the learners. The learners may not be aware why you selected this vocabulary, but it's still going to be useful to them.
Right.
Awesome.
It's good to inform you as a teacher too, and to make you feel more confident in your choices, right?
That's right. I mean, I think a lot of teacher training looks at developing grammatical awareness. So in teacher training, the participants often know, I'm not that confident with these grammatical patterns or the rules, as they're called. But they think, because I'm an expert speaker, my lexical awareness is strong. And so, but I think there is value in developing your lexical awareness as a teacher. So trying to improve your intuitions, trying to improve your knowledge of what's frequent and what's not, and being able to recognize patterns in text and pull them out and help learners to notice them. So I'm always in favor of sort of having a bit more focus on developing lexical awareness and not just grammatical awareness.
Right. Yeah. True.
Awesome.
Yeah. Lots of really interesting points you've touched on. Now, maybe our listeners want to get in touch with you, maybe share some of their ideas. How can they reach you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm always open to discussions and collaborations and other projects. So you can check my website. Is probably the easiest way. So if you just search my name, Ben Naismith, rather than me telling the whole website.
We can link it to the description of the episode as well. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And on my website, you'll see there's my Twitter. So at Ben Naismith, ELT. And it's the same for my, if you want to read some of my work, you can check out the articles through my website, but they're also available on, for example, academia.edu or ResearchGate. And I'm always happy to, if they're behind a paywall, I'm always happy to send a copy if you reach out and ask.
That's great.
Awesome. Great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking some time to share with us your experience and your knowledge of this field of corpus linguistics.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. And we really appreciated you explaining and helping us to know a little bit more about corpus and corpus linguistics as well. I'm sure a lot of teachers can learn from it. So do feel free to reach out to Ben. Obviously, you can visit his website. The link will be in the description for this episode.
Great. Yes, lots of great advice today. And as always, don't forget that you can get in touch with us on Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast. And you can also send us an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com, or visit our website to access all of our previous episodes from every season so far for free. Just go to esl-talk.com, ESL Talk. Remember to add that hyphen or dash .com.
Yep. And you can also join us on Instagram.
Yes, you can find me at Learning with Faye. Faye is Fey.
Or I'm Daniel Teacher. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.